Welcome back to Boring Story for Sleep. If you are here right now, it means the day is done. The noise has settled. And somewhere between the weight of your pillow and the quiet of this room, you are ready to let go. Good. You are exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we travel very far, across an ocean, across centuries, to a small village tucked between flooded rice fields and pine-covered hills in the island nation of Japan. The year is somewhere in the mid-1400s, a time the Japanese call the Muromachi period, a time of shifting lords, wandering soldiers, and long, uncertain roads. But none of that chaos touches the village tonight.
Tonight, the harvest is nearly done. The air smells of damp earth and cut stalks. The frogs have begun their evening song along the paddies. Lantern light flickers in farmhouse windows, and the mountains to the north are draped in the soft purple of a sky just finishing its last light. It is the kind of evening that asks nothing of you. It simply holds you. Before we begin, a small thing. If this story finds you in that soft place, the place between awake and dreaming, I want you to know you can let yourself fall there. This story will still be here. The voice will still be here. You do not have to hold on to every word. Just breathe and let the story carry you.
And if tonight is your first time here at Boring Story for Sleep, welcome. We make long, slow, atmospheric stories for adults who need a quiet place to land at the end of the day. No jump scares, no sudden music, no urgency. Just stories. Just this. If you enjoy tonight's journey, consider subscribing. It takes only a moment, and it means the next story will be waiting for you whenever you need it. But now, let the day go. Close your eyes if you like, and come with me to Japan.
Picture a valley. Not a dramatic valley, not cliffs or waterfalls or anything that demands your attention. Just a gentle, cupped piece of land, the way the earth sometimes folds its hands together. Rice paddies fill the bottom of the valley, flooded in spring and summer, golden and heavy in early autumn, and by now, mid-harvest, beginning to show their bare, dark soil between rows of cut stalks. The village sits at the eastern edge of this valley, pressed lightly against the first slope of the hills. 12 houses, perhaps 15, built of pale wood and dark thatch, with low roofs weighted down against the winter winds that will come in another month or two. A single dirt road runs through the center of the village. It comes from the south, from the direction of the larger market town, 2 hours' walk away, and it disappears into the hills to the north, where it becomes a forest path, and then, eventually, nothing useful. This morning, the road brought a stranger. Not a merchant, not a pilgrim, not a tax collector, which would have been worse. A samurai. He arrived just after dawn, when the mist was still sitting low over the paddies, and the farmers were only beginning to pull on their straw sandals and shuffle toward the fields. He came on foot, no horse, which was unusual, carrying only a worn traveling pack and the 2 swords at his hip, the long and the short, both in plain black lacquered scabbards with no family crest. No crest. That was the first thing the village headman noticed.
A samurai with no crest was a samurai with no lord. A ronin, a wave man, they were called, like a wave that had come loose from the ocean, moving but belonging nowhere. The headman, a careful, practical man named Denzo, who had lived through 3 different lords claiming this valley in his lifetime, stood at the edge of his house and watched the stranger approach. The samurai stopped at a respectful distance. He was older than Denzo had expected, perhaps 50. His hair was gray at the temples, tied back simply. His traveling clothes were clean, but worn thin at the elbows. He had the kind of face that had been weathered slowly, over many years, not by any single dramatic thing, just by weather and road and time. He bowed, properly, deeply. "I am passing through," he said, in a voice quiet enough that it seemed designed not to startle anyone. "I would ask only to sleep somewhere dry tonight, and perhaps to be given work in exchange. I have strong hands if they are needed." Denzo looked at him for a long moment. The harvest was behind schedule. 3 of the younger men had left the village that summer to follow a lord's army somewhere to the south. The women and the older farmers had been carrying more than their share for weeks. "We are harvesting," Denzo said finally. "Can you cut rice?" The samurai looked at his own hands, the hands of a man trained since childhood to hold a sword. "I can learn," he said. His name, he said, was Sato. No family name offered, just Sato. The headman gave him a corner of the storage barn to sleep in, a mat, a rough blanket, and a bowl of rice porridge for breakfast. In return, Sato joined the harvest line by mid-morning. The farmers watched him from the corners of their eyes. There were 7 of them working that section of the paddy, 4 women, 2 older men, and now this stranger with his swords wrapped in cloth and tucked against the barn wall. He had been given a sickle, the short, curved kind used for cutting the stalks near the root, and he held it with the slightly formal grip of someone who had never held a sickle before, but understood the geometry of blades. He was slow at first. The right angle, the rhythm of the cut, the way to move through the water without disturbing the stalks still standing. It took him the better part of an hour before he stopped fighting the work and let his body simply learn. By afternoon, he had found his pace. He did not talk. Neither did the others much. Harvest work is quiet work, the repetitive kind that empties the mind and fills the hands. The sound was mostly the soft shear of sickles, the splash of feet in shallow water, the occasional call of a bird from the tree line. And underneath all of it, the frogs. Always the frogs. In the rice paddies of Japan in that season, the frogs are constant. Their sound is not harsh or alarming. It is simply present, like a low hum the valley makes to itself. A sound so old, it has become part of the silence. Sato found himself listening to it as he worked. The farmer's daughter came at midday with the lunch. Her name was Hannah. She was 17, or perhaps 18, the kind of age that is still soft at its edges, not yet hardened by too many difficult seasons. She was not small, the way sometimes girls in stories are described. She was sturdy, in the particular way of people who have worked outdoors their whole lives. Her hands were calloused. Her posture was straight from carrying loads since childhood. She carried the food in a flat wooden box, rice balls wrapped in dried leaves, pickled vegetables in a small clay jar, and a clay pot of hot barley tea, still steaming in the cool autumn air. She moved down the line without making a ceremony of it. Rice ball for old Kenji, rice ball for her mother, rice ball for the widow Masa, who took hers without looking up. And then she reached the end of the line, where Sato stood ankle-deep in water. And she paused for only a half-second before handing him his without hesitation. He accepted it with both hands and bowed his head, the way you would to someone of higher status. She almost smiled at that. A samurai bowing to a farmer's daughter over a rice ball? But she said nothing and moved on. The sun dropped behind the western hills around the time the line of workers reached the far edge of the paddy. Denzo called the work done for the day. Tools were rinsed and stacked. The farmers moved back toward the village with the slow, satisfied tiredness of bodies that had done what they were built for. Sato cleaned the borrowed sickle carefully, more carefully than a man who had only used a tool for one day typically would, and returned it to its place on the barn wall. Then he retrieved his swords, unwrapped them, and refastened them at his hip with the practiced ease of a man returning to his own skin. He sat outside the barn as the last light faded. The village was cooking now. You could tell by the smell. Wood smoke, something with miso, the faint sweetness of rice being steamed. Lanterns were being lit inside houses. The children, who had stayed carefully away from the stranger all day, had been called inside. The frogs continued. They always continued. It was then that he heard the flute. It came from the far side of the barn, from the direction of the farmhouse that faced the eastern hill. A bamboo flute. Shakuhachi, the monks sometimes called that kind. The sound was low, breathy at its edges, not perfectly smooth the way a trained musician plays, but something better for that imperfection. It was honest. The melody was simple. A handful of notes, repeated with small variations, rising and falling, like something the player was working out slowly, privately, for no audience at all. Sato did not move toward the sound. He simply sat, his back against the barn wall, his eyes half closed, and he listened. He had not sat still and listened to music in a very long time. He could not have said how long the flute played, long enough for the sky to finish its darkening, and for the first stars to become certain, long enough for the village to quiet all around it, one lantern at a time. And then it stopped. Not abruptly, just the way a breath ends. Naturally, without drama. He slept that night on his mat in the corner of the barn, The smell of the place was straw and wood and the faint animal memory of horses that had lived there in some previous season. The barn wall had gaps that let in the cold, but also the sounds of the valley, wind in the rice stalks, the occasional soft creak of the farmhouse settling, and underneath everything, in the middle distance, the frogs. He pulled the blanket up. He slept.
Dawn in the valley came quietly. It did not announce itself with dramatic color. The sky simply lightened. Gray, becoming silver, becoming the pale white gold of an autumn morning with no strong sun. Sato was awake before it happened. Old habits. Decades of training.
Old habits. Decades of training that had written sunrise into his body more permanently than sleep ever could. He sat up on his mat, folded the blanket, and sat for a while in the dim barn, listening to the village wake. A door opening. The sound of water being poured. Someone adding wood to a fire. The small percussion of it. The first birds. And then, from the far side of the barn, the low sound of someone already moving in the farmhouse. Unhurried. Practiced. The sounds of a person who has always been an early riser. He recognized the rhythm of it without knowing how. Some mornings announce themselves through the sounds of the people inside them.
He was given a second morning of work without it being explicitly offered. He simply appeared at the edge of the paddy when the farmers arrived, and Denzo handed him the sickle again, without discussion. The second day was easier than the first. His hands had memorized the motion overnight, the way hands do with honest work. By mid-morning, he was keeping pace with old Kenji, who had been harvesting rice for 50 years. This seemed to please Kenji, who said nothing about it, but began in small ways to position himself near Sato while they worked. Two quiet men working in parallel. Hana came again at midday. Same wooden box, same clay pot.
This time, as she handed Sato his rice ball, she said, without looking up from the box, "You improved." He looked at her. "At the sickle?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and moved on down the line. He looked at the rice ball in his hands for a moment. And then, quietly, he smiled. The afternoon brought clouds from the north. Not rain clouds, just the gray, low ceiling that autumn sometimes pulls over the mountains like a blanket being adjusted. The light became softer, flatter. The colors of the paddy shifted. The gold of the remaining stalks, the dark brown of the cut rows, the pale silver of the standing water, all muted, all gentle.
Sato found himself looking at it, between cuts, the way the light moved across the field, the small ripples from their feet. A single white egret standing at the far edge of the paddy, absolutely still, watching the water with the patience of something that has never had anywhere else to be. He could not remember the last time he had looked at a rice field. He had passed through hundreds of them, marched through them, camped beside them, watched them burn in 3 different wars in 2 different provinces. But looking at one, simply looking, without moving, without purpose, that was different. That, he realized, he had not done in a very long time.
By the 3rd day, he was no longer a stranger. Not a friend. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, given the distance that a lifetime of roads creates between a man and any particular place. But no longer a stranger. The village had absorbed him the way a quiet place absorbs most things. Slowly, without drama, simply by continuing to exist around him until his presence stopped feeling unusual. The children had begun to appear near the barn. Not close, but near. The way children approach something uncertain, testing the distance each day, moving the invisible boundary an arm's length closer. By the 3rd morning, 2 small boys were sitting on the low fence across the road from the barn, watching him with the open, unashamed curiosity that only children can sustain for long periods without embarrassment. Sato looked at them once. They did not run. He looked away, and after a while, they climbed down from the fence and went back to whatever work children have in the early morning, which is mostly the work of being in the world without apology. He appreciated that about them. The harvest was nearing its end. 2 more sections of the paddy remained. The northern rows, which the farmers had left for last because the drainage there was poor and the footing difficult. But the weather was holding. The clouds of the previous afternoon had moved east overnight, and the morning was crisp and clear and smelled of pine from the hills above. Denzo came to the barn before the work began. He stood at the entrance, not coming inside, the way people stand when they are about to say something that has required thought.
"We will finish by tomorrow evening," he said. "Perhaps the day after, if the north section is slow." Sato understood what was being said, or rather, what was not being said. "I will be ready to move on when the work is done," he replied. Denzo nodded. Then, after a moment, added, in the particular gruff tone of a man who does not make a habit of generosity and is slightly uncomfortable with it, "You work honestly. The village thanks you." He left before Sato could respond. Sato looked at the folded blanket on his mat. 2 more days. It happened on the 3rd evening, the way most real conversations happen. Not planned, not sought, but arrived at through the simple accident of 2 people being in the same quiet place at the same quiet time. Sato was sitting outside the barn as the sun went down, as had become his habit. He had removed his outer layer, the dark travel jacket, and was mending a small tear in the sleeve with a needle and thread from his pack, working slowly by the last of the daylight. It was the kind of domestic task that looks entirely wrong on a samurai, and entirely right on a person who has been traveling alone for a long time. Hana came around the corner of the barn, carrying a water bucket, heading toward the well at the back of the property. She stopped when she saw him, not startled, simply pausing in the way you pause when you encounter something unexpected but harmless. She looked at the needle, at his hands, at the tear in the sleeve.
"You are doing it backwards," she said. He looked at his work, then at her. "Am I?"
The thread will pull loose. You need to anchor the knot on the inside of the seam, not the outside. She set down her bucket, came closer, and, without asking permission, with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has been correct about practical things their entire life, she held out her hand. He gave her the jacket. She sat on the low step beside the barn door, turned the sleeve inside out, and began to redo the stitch with quick, confident movements. He watched her hands. They were unhesitating. The hands of someone who has mended things so many times that the motion is stored in the muscle, not the mind. "You play the flute," he said, after a while. She did not look up from the stitching. "In the evenings," she said, "when the work is done." "Where did you learn?" A small pause. The needle moved. "My father played," she said. "He died 4 years ago. I taught myself from memory, what I remember of how he held it." Sato said nothing for a moment. There was nothing useful to say, and he had learned long ago, over many years and many such silences with many different people, that saying nothing is sometimes the most respectful thing. "You play it honestly," he said finally. She looked up at that, a brief, assessing look. "What does that mean?" "It means you play it like yourself," he said. "Not like someone trying to play a flute." She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked back down at the stitching. "That is because I never had a teacher to tell me how it should sound," she said. There might have been a small edge in that, the slightest acknowledgement of something that had cost her something. But it did not become bitterness. It simply moved through her voice and was gone. She finished the mending, turned the sleeve right side out, tested the seam with her thumb, and held the jacket back out to him. He took it, looked at the stitch. It was neat and firm and entirely invisible from the outside. "Thank you," he said. She picked up her bucket and walked to the well without looking back. That night, lying on his mat in the barn, Sato thought about the conversation. Not about what had been said, that was simple enough, but about what had not been said, the negative space of it, the things that two people hold back when they are being careful with each other, which is to say, when they are being kind. She had not asked where he was going. People in villages learn not to ask that of Ronin. The answer is almost always nowhere in particular, and nowhere in particular is a sad kind of answer. He had not asked whether she was to be married. That too was not his to ask. She had the particular self-contained quality of someone who has arranged her interior world very neatly around the things that are actually hers. Her work, her mornings, her flute, and leaves no open corners for the questions of passing strangers. He respected that. He had been, in his life, a great many things. A student from the age of 6. A soldier from 15. A loyal retainer to a lord who died in a battle that probably should have been avoided.
a wanderer since then. Since the war that ended the Lord's life and dissolved the household and scattered the retainers like seeds into the wind. That had been 7 years ago. 7 years of roads, of small work in return for shelter, of the particular loneliness that is not painful exactly, but simply present, the way a stone in your sandal is present.
Noticed, accommodated, carried. He was not unhappy. He wanted to be precise about that, even here in the dark of a barn, even with no one to hear the precision. He was not unhappy. He was simply a man who had been moving for a long time. The flute came at its usual time, after the lanterns went out in the farmhouse, after the village settled into its nighttime quiet. Just a few notes, the same handful with the small variations, rising, holding, falling. The sound of someone playing for no one but themselves, and perhaps the valley, and whatever quiet thing listens to valleys at night. He lay still and listened until it stopped. He thought, I will remember this. Wherever the road goes, I will remember this particular evening, in this particular valley, with the frogs and the harvest smell, and this sound. That was all. Not longing, not regret. Just the deliberate act of keeping something. The north section of the paddy was slower than expected. The footing was poor, as Denzo had predicted. The ground uneven beneath the water, the stalks thicker and more stubborn at the root. But the morning was calm, and the farmers worked steadily. And by late afternoon, the last rows were cut and bundled and standing in their neat sheaves along the edge of the field. When it was done, the farmers stood for a moment in the silence of completion. There is a particular silence that comes at the end of long physical work. Not the silence of exhaustion, but something cleaner. The silence of a thing finished, of a year's labor gathered in. Old Kenji said something under his breath that might have been a prayer, or might have been simply a man talking to the field he had tended for 50 years. No one else spoke. Then Denzo said, "Come, there is sake." And they walked back to the village. There was no celebration, exactly. Just the small, real version of one. The farmers gathered in Denzo's house, sitting around the fire, sharing cups of rough sake and bowls of the season's rice, and talking in the slow, wandering way that tired people talk when they have earned the right to be still. Sato sat at the edge of the gathering. Not excluded. He had been given a cup, a bowl, a place by the fire. But at the edge, which was natural, which was right. He was a guest of the work, not of the village. He listened to them talk. Old Kenji told a story about a harvest 30 years ago when the rain came before they were finished and half the rice was lost. He told it without self-pity, as a fact of a life that contained many such facts. The widow Masa remembered it differently. She said the rain had come at the right time, that it was the price collectors who had been the real disaster that year, not the weather.
This led to a prolonged discussion of price collectors across the decades, delivered with the particular eloquence of people who have had strong feelings about price collectors for a very long time and have refined those feelings to a fine edge. Sato found himself suppressing a smile more than once. Hana sat across the room, near her mother, listening more than speaking. Once, she caught his eye, not intentionally, just the way eyes sometimes meet across a room without consultation. She looked away first. He looked away a moment after. He left before dawn, not from haste, and not from the particular cowardice of men who cannot bear goodbyes, simply because dawn was when he had always left places, in 7 years of leaving places. It was the easiest time, the world asking the least of you in those hours, the road still quiet, the light still forming. Denzo had said goodbye the previous evening, in his brief, practical way. A handshake, a small package of rice and dried fish for the road, and a second nod that carried more warmth than his first. Sato had accepted all of it with both hands. He was adjusting his pack in the barn by the last of the moonlight when he heard footsteps outside, soft, deliberate. Someone who had woken early on purpose. Hana came around the corner of the barn. She was wearing her outer work clothes. She had already been up, already dressed for the day's chores. She was carrying something wrapped in cloth. She held it out. "For the road," she said. He took it. It was warm. Freshly made rice balls, wrapped in leaves, tied with a cord of rice straw. He could tell by the weight and shape without unwrapping it. "You did not have to," he began. "I was awake," she said simply, which was its own kind of answer. He held the package with both hands and looked at her. In the gray pre-dawn light, her face was very still. Not sad. She was not a person who wore her sadness on her face. Simply still, in the way of someone who has decided to be present for a thing, without performing a feeling about it. "The flute," he said. "Keep playing it." She looked at him. "Even backwards?" she said. And there, just there, in the gray light of a morning that had not quite arrived, she smiled. Not wide, not long, but entirely real. "Especially backwards," he said. He walked out of the village as the first birds were beginning. He did not look back, not from coldness, from the understanding that some things are better carried whole, undisturbed by the act of looking. He had the rice balls. He had the memory of the flute. He had 2 days of honest work in his hands, and the particular completeness of a place that had been, for a short time, real. The road north curved up into the hills and entered the pines. The light came slowly. The mist sat in the low places. Below him, in the valley, the rice paddies lay bare and peaceful in the early gray. The harvest done, the water still. He could not hear the frogs at this distance, but he knew they were there. The village continued, as villages do. The bare paddies were flooded again before winter to rest the soil. The sheaves were threshed, and the rice stored in the dark cool of the granary.
The road stayed empty through the cold months, and the valley pulled itself inward, the way all cold places do. Smaller, quieter, turned toward its own fire. Hannah played the flute in the evenings, as she always had. The melody did not change dramatically, but it grew, the way things grow that are practiced honestly and without hurry. A note held a little longer, a new phrase tried, discarded, tried again. The small, patient architecture of a skill being built in private, for no audience, for no purpose, except the thing itself.
She never spoke of the samurai to anyone. There was nothing to say precisely. He had come, he had worked, he had eaten her rice balls and sat in the barn and listened to her play something she had never meant for anyone to hear. And he had told her it sounded like herself. She thought about that sometimes in the evenings, what it meant to sound like yourself, whether that was the hardest thing or the only thing, whether, in the end, they were the same. And Sato walked north, through the pines and then out of them, through a market town and through smaller towns, and through open stretches of winter road where the sky was enormous and gray, and the only company was the sound of his own feet. He carried the memory of the valley the way he carried everything he had decided to keep, lightly, and without needing to look at it too often. It was simply there. The frogs, the egret in the paddy, the smell of miso through a farmhouse wall at dusk, a smile in a gray morning that had not quite arrived. He ate the rice balls on the first day, sitting on a stone beside the road, looking out at a view of nothing much, just fields and a distant hillside, and the particular ordinary beauty of the world in the middle of its long winter preparation. They were very good. She had pressed a small pickled plum into the center of each one. The kind of small, considered thing that a person does when they want to do something kind, without making a ceremony of the kindness. He sat with that for a while. Then he folded the leaf wrappings neatly, put them in his pack, stood up, and walked on. And that is where we leave them. Not with a dramatic ending, not with a reunion or a tragedy or anything that announces itself as significant. Just a woman in a valley playing a flute in the evening, and a man on a road walking north, carrying something small and warm and carefully made. That is how most of the real stories end, I think. Not with the world changed, just with a person slightly different than they were before. A samurai who learned for a few days how to hold a sickle. A young woman who was told once by someone passing through that the most honest thing a person can do is sound like themselves. Small things. But the small things are the ones that stay. And now, the story is done. But you do not have to go anywhere. If sleep has already found you, then let it keep you. The valley will be here. The frogs will still be singing. The road will still be empty and quiet.
and covered in the soft gray of an autumn morning. And if you are still with me, still floating in that place between the story and the dark, then I want you to know that you have done something tonight that not everyone remembers to do. You rested. You stopped. You let a story carry you. You gave yourself 1 hour in a valley in Japan 400 years ago where nothing terrible happened and nothing needed to be solved, and the most important sound in the world was a bamboo flute playing the same handful of notes over and over, getting slowly more like itself. That matters more than you think.
If tonight's story gave you something, a quiet hour, a softer landing into sleep, a few minutes of being somewhere else entirely, consider leaving a comment below. Tell me what you felt. Tell me which part of the valley you stayed in longest. And if you have not yet subscribed to Boring Story for Sleep, there is a button. It is very easy to press, and it means the next story will find you. The next long, slow, unhurried hour in some other corner of history, waiting for you whenever you need it. No rush. You can do it now, or you can do it in the morning. Either way, I am glad you were here tonight. I am glad you rested. Sleep well. The frogs are still singing.